never thought of those together, but I do think that's a great idea.
Okay.
I mean, she didn't make that suggestion about a study group. I'm doing that, but I'd never thought of those three resources
Thought of those together.
as parallel. I'll be right back.
Okay. Hey, Liz, the online service was okay from
Yes,
my side, so.
yes. And right now, just so you will know, we're still using Colby's laptop.
Okay.
The issue we're having a little bit is that we are seeing you on the big TV screen. And you may be able to tell me how to do this. His laptop screen is blank. So we are clearly not, what is the term when we're mimicking each other? But we are hearing you through the computer, not through the TV. And we have both volumes up at 100.
And we can barely hear you.
If we could get the speaker coming from the TV, it would help, but I don't know how to do that.
I don't.
Yeah, I mean, we're okay. We don't have anyone in here who's going to interrupt and keep talking today. If I can be so blunt, I know I'm making everybody laugh. So we should be able to hear okay.
No, you're good.
Bite your tongue. She's gone. But so I'm just going to move the computer down to the middle of the table a little bit. But I just wanted you to know that in case we have an issue.
Okay.
Okay. I will smack you if you say that again.
I'll go find her and leave.
No.
They're
Yeah, you
gone.
better leave
They're
if you do
gone.
that. Oh, good. She's gonna watch it at home, so be careful.
Yeah, be careful.
Not yet.
Oh, true,
And we're
true.
muted.
Dawn and Rome are,
Yeah.
no, we're not muted, we're
We're not
unmuted.
muted now, okay.
Robert, we'll wait a few more minutes for others to join. So,
By the way, please convey my apologies to Mr. Mondane. I just could not get to the celebration. I wanted to very badly, and so glad for your school district. He's going to be a great leader, and you've got several new visionary voices over there, and that's going to be great. I had the premier privilege and honor this past week of meeting with the kindergartners of Genesis School. And I left at 9 o'clock and I told them, I said, well, my day is completely downhill from here on. My goodness, when you start off with these kindergartners, how alive, how vibrant. God, it was a highlight. Be right back, gonna get some more coffee.
so just a few comments while we're waiting for some people. So last Sunday we had a discussion about Ukraine. This was the daughter of a cousin of mine and her husband who was Ukrainian and Russian relatives. And they started off with a discussion about Cain and Abel, and we were all anxious to hear stories of the Ukraine. And I think it was a challenge for us. And I had suggested to Liz that maybe we go back and do the Bible study part of the Genesis story. And if we don't have anything else that's planned, I think Liz sent a note out to folks who were how you can support the ministry work in the particular town that they talked about directly. So if anybody needs that information, sort of let me know. So. And then our friends from Central Kansas checked in, and maybe Kay can provide us the weather report, because I know that they had severe weather out there.
Andorra. Andover.
Yeah, it already went through it.
Yeah. Pete's daughter and son-in-law are good. They're sold their current house, haven't moved into their new house yet. Both are okay. About a mile from them.
Wow.
So, and nothing like the one 30 years ago, but still quite significant. So,
All right, look who's logging in.
lots of houses, lots of businesses. You've probably seen pictures from the YMCA. Brent, when you guys come, that intersection you go through, well, you might not come that way. You've come to Wichita and back, but that where that big Dillon's is there,
Yeah.
a lot of the damage was right around there.
Wow. Okay.
Yeah, but miracle, no, that always amazes me, no deaths, no significant injuries.
Amen.
Yeah. It's kind of the one thing people can agree on is how powerful it is. And when you know it's coming, you take cover, except the storm chasers and, all the footage they had of it. But yep, it was scary.
And I did see a headline this morning that there were some Oklahoma college kids who were injured because they were out chasing the cloud or something. And I didn't have time to follow up, but it's like, really, from Oklahoma? You're okay, whatever. I mean, I realize Wichita's closer to Oklahoma than we are, but apparently there were some storm chasers from one of the colleges that.
I actually saw 3 of them were killed in a car
Is
accident.
that what it was? I just saw a quick headline and thought I'd check when I get home.
There was 3 OU students, or I can't remember which. Yeah. Well, I didn't know if that was here or in Oklahoma where they had storms maybe as well. I don't know.
I'm not sure. Yeah, I don't know. Storm
So-
chasing was not on my bucket
No,
list.
me neither.
No, mine either.
I've lived in Kansas too many years.
So we're at the top of the hour, and we're once again have the wonderful presence of Bob Hill to talk about somebody that some may know. That's always interesting. Who knows about each of Bob's great souls and great prayers? So I want to turn the floor over to Bob, and I think we got about 6 or 7 people in the church at the Sunday school class. We've got 3 people online, and we're off and running. And Bob, so I'll just turn it over to you.
Well, good morning. Glad to be with you once again. And this is very, very appropriate since Yom HaShoah Day was just this past week, and that is Holocaust Memorial Day. And that took place this last week. And in Kansas City, there is actually a remembrance of the Holocaust at the Jewish Community Campus, I believe at 3 p.m. this afternoon. So it's very appropriate that we're dealing with Dietrich Bonhoeffer. I wish that I could say that I intentionally suggested Bonhoeffer for this Sunday because of that, but I did not, except insofar as April is the date that Bonhoeffer became a martyr, or is the month in which he became a martyr. And it is also basically the virtual end of World War II as well. So we'll go into Bonhoeffer's biography here in just a moment. But for now, just want you to look at his face and see this man who is part of the bourgeoisie of German culture, and a person of extraordinary gifts, genius, intellect, and talents as a leader. So thank you, Brent, for always managing the slide deck. And let me just say a little bit more about Bonhoeffer. I want you to see his picture there, and note the three-piece suit. Note the air of confidence that he even convey in this picture. His naturalness, his not nonchalantness, but his comfortableness in his own skin. And he was a person who barely the age of 39, like unto Martin Luther King, was martyred. And we, all of us, I think, have to ask, what did I accomplish by the time I was 39? Hold that thought too, and you can push back and challenge me on it, and challenge me about Bonhoeffer when we come to some of the implications of studying Dietrich Bonhoeffer and learning about him. So Bonhoeffer is born. He has a twin sister named Sabine, and he's born in Breslau, Germany. If you go to look for Breslau, Germany right now, you won't find it because it's now in Poland. And this is part of the German Empire back in the day. This is part of the Prussian kind of legacy and reach of the empires back before the Nazis, and then also certainly back before democracy finally prevailed there in Germany. His father was a teacher of neurology and psychiatry, and he would become one of Germany's leading empirical psychologists. At the age of 13, he will announce that he is going to become a theologian. He's really smart. And this is a surprise to his family, not his intellect, but the fact that he announces that he's going to become a theologian. Why? Because they weren't particularly observant Lutherans. I mean, they kind of were. He gets confirmed by the time he's 15 there in the Grunewald Church in Berlin. But they have a nice, comfortable, middle-class, bourgeois existence. In 1927, at the mere age of 21, he has already obtained his doctorate, and he wrote his thesis on the communion of saints. He will serve a couple of years in Barcelona, Spain, as a vicar in a German Lutheran congregation, but he's still not ordained. In 1930 and 31, he spends a postgraduate period of time in New York City at Union Theological Seminary up on the Upper West Side, but he will also kind of intern and learn much from Abyssinian Baptist Church, which was maybe the preeminent African-American church in all of Harlem. And he will love it there, and I'll point out a movie where you can see where that is rendered and that story is told. In 1931, he becomes a lecturer in theology at the University of Berlin. He's ordained in 1931. Also in November, he's 25 years old. Then Hitler will become, 2 years later, the Reich Chancellor of Germany on January the 30th. 2 days later, Bonhoeffer gives a radio talk called Changes in the Concept of the Leader Principle. I think most people who know their history know that Führer means leader, kind of like, and it's affectionate and also respectful. And in Germany's case, it became idolatrous. At any rate, Bonhoeffer will push back against this Führer principle, and his address on the radio is cut off mid-lecture, mid-statement, the plug is pulled. And Hitler will give no countenance. He will brook no quarter on anybody who's opposed to him. In September of 33, he collaborates with Martin Niemöller. Who's he? He's a Lutheran pastor who wrote the very, very famous little poem. First, they came for the communists, but I was not a communist, so I did not speak up. Then they came for the trade unionists, and because I was a trade unionist, I did not speak up. Then they came for the gypsies, and I wasn't a gypsy, and I did not speak up. And it goes on, the complete thing. They came for the Jews. He wasn't a Jew, so he didn't speak up. Then they came for me, and there was no one left to speak up. And Martin Niemöller, as well as Bonhoeffer and also Karl Barth, would resist the Nazis in their own separate ways. Niemöller would also spend some time in a concentration camp. He will organize 2,000 pastors, most of them Lutherans, to resist the control of the church, not just the country, but the control of the church by the Nazis. And he'll share a couple of pastorates, one in Germany, one in London, for a while. In May of 1934, he helps to organize the Confessing Church in Barmen, Germany. The Barmen is very famous for what Karl Barth would eventually write called the Barmen Declaration. But in my estimation, it was a little bit too late. Hitler didn't come to power, but came to prominence in the 20s. And finally, by 1933, he had come to absolute power. So there was a decade's worth of resistance that could have taken place, but that did not. He will become a leader in a clandestine seminary, which will eventually be shut down in 1937. He will begin to participate. He preaches at the Olympic Village, and after he preaches there, they withdraw any kind of authorization for him to teach at the University of Berlin anymore. Then in 1937, the Gestapo closes the Finkenwald Seminary. 38, he becomes part of the resistance. He's a courier and a kind of a diplomat in relationship to the British government. And he will eventually know about, approve, and sanction and endorse the attempts to assassinate Hitler. He will continue to write books. He writes a book called Life Together, which is about life in the seminary and also what it means to live in community. He will write The Cost of Discipleship. Ethics is one of his biggest books. He's an intellectual of the first rank. In 1943, he becomes engaged, and just a mere 3 months later, he's arrested and imprisoned. He's never allowed to marry, and he's eventually transferred from one place to another, and including Buchenwald, which was a killing place in the German Reich. He will eventually be moved to Flausenburg, where he is hanged under Himmler's orders, who was one of the lieutenants for top-ranking officials in Hitler's regime. And then Hitler will, let me go back to his hanging. In a very cold day, on a very cold day, and this is Himmler's instructions, he is stripped naked and hung naked until he's dead. And the German powers that be, they know that the end is coming. And a mere 21 days later, Hitler will commit suicide in his bunker in Berlin and die. And a lot of people ask, oh, only what if? What if? We'll come to that thesis also later on in our time together. Several memorial services are held for But oh, by the way, and they never did discover where his body was buried. It was cast off. It was just viewed as negligible, and nobody could ever find it. His burial site finally is unknown. In 1951, the very first version in German of Letters and Papers from Prison, or the original title was Resistance and Submission, and that was a title given to it by Bethke, who was Bonhoeffer's best friend and who visited him while he was in prison. He collected all the letters and papers that Bonhoeffer had written during his prison time into a volume, and it was published. Then in 1953, the first English edition was published under the title Prisoner for God. And then that would eventually become a book that has never gone unprinted. It has always been in print since it was released. And several versions of it, an enlarged version, a kind of amplified version, any kind of version will do. And that's a book that you all should have for your library. The International Bonhoeffer Society, which does research, which keeps up with the latest findings, was established in 1973. And then 41 years later, the Bonhoeffer Center was established online as an online presence, a website. Here are pictures of Bonhoeffer in his life. Here is Sabine and Dietrich, his twin sister there. They were obviously fraternal twins. Here he is on the lower left-hand side with his family. That's Dietrich on the far right. But you see the Bonhoeffer tribe. He's one of 7 children, for goodness sake. In the middle, on the lower part, is Bethke, his good friend. They're his parents in the upper right-hand side. And then Bonhoeffer with some students. That's him in the bottom middle, sitting down. That's Bonhoeffer there. Next slide. This is Bonhoeffer in New York City. Bonhoeffer, I believe, in the picture in the lower left is in the right, kind of second row, blonde hair right there. Yeah, you've got the cursor over him. I think that's Bonhoeffer there. In the very middle with the bald head, the tall kind of guy, that's Reinhold Niebuhr. And Union Theological Seminary was it was kind of the epicenter of all the greatest thinkers who ever were for a while. And this is in 1930, 31, but eventually Paul Tillich will come there. There's a guy named James Muhlenberg that will have a lot of influence on Frederick Buechner. It's just an epicenter for progressive, powerful thought. The tower on the upper left-hand side is what you see when you go up the Upper West Side and finally find the seminary. This is the faculty and some of the students, the graduate students. But Bonhoeffer is there not as a graduate student, nor as a student at all. He's there to lecture, to learn, to do research. He's doing postgraduate work. On the right-hand side are pictures of Abyssinian Baptist Church. The interior, the lower right-hand side, is what the church looks like now. The facade in the middle, on the lower part, that's what it looks like now, but in black and white. But the interior where the choir is seated and the huge balcony and the huge attendance, that's not unlike what it probably looked like on Easter Sunday, given that the mask mandate and the vaccination protocols were in use, etc. This past Easter 2 Sundays ago, or 1 Sunday ago, 2 Sundays ago. Sorry, my apologies. But this is what Bonhoeffer would have sat in this crowd. He would have listened to the preaching, the proclamation, the liveliness. And he says in some of his writings that the church, the African American church in America, is very, very much alive. and very much the key to understanding what real life Christianity should be about in the world. Next slide. So where do we start? These are many of the books. Remember, he only lived 39 years, but boy, was he prodigious in his output. I've already mentioned The Cost of Discipleship, Ethics, Life Together. If I had 2 books or 3 books to suggest to you, I would suggest the Letters and Papers from Prison on the far left. I would suggest the book on the far right, which are prison poems. He is not a great poet, okay? But he's a powerful poet, and he writes about things that matter. The other book that I guess I'd suggest you get 4 books for your library. On the lower left-hand side, Psalms, the prayer book of the Bible. He went into the Psalms as an exceedingly important text for Christians and everybody, but especially for Christians. And then you see that book there, After 10 Years, Dietrich Bonhoeffer and Our Times. I think that book, it was just published in 2017, although that lecture or that essay, After 10 Years, had been known about for a while. There are collected sermons. There's 2 volumes of his sermons there. And then you see a kind of the Cambridge Compendium or companion to Dietrich Bonhoeffer. And that's about a 500-page book. John W. DeGruchy, and if I'm not mistaken, he is one of the greatest scholars on South Africa as well. Next slide. You can also look at books that you could enjoy personally. There are essential writings kind of books, the Testament of Freedom, as well as the book that has a wonderful introductory essay by Robert Coles, and that's the second book from the left on the top. But there's also devotional literature, A Year with Dietrich Bonhoeffer, A Year of Daily Devotions, I Want to Live These Days with You. Then there's a couple of books, Advent and Christmas, in the middle that I think would be worthy of your attention and investment. And then there are some biographies. Eberhard Bethge's book, Dietrich Bonhoeffer, a biography, is it's the foundation of any good scholarship and anything good worthy of note about Bonhoeffer. Renat Bethge, after Eberhard died, wrote a very brief biography, and it too is a kind of first ringside seat, firsthand account of somebody who knew Bonhoeffer. This book on the lower left, well, on the right side, yes, that Brent has his cursor over, is a book that was published in Germany, I believe in 2006, on the centennial of his birth. And it is excellent, and it had access to some materials that Bethge did not have when he wrote his book. And then Charles Marsh's book, A Life of Dietrich Bonhoeffer, is the most recent book, and I believe it's 2014. All of these books are great books. I want to caution you against ever giving any credence to or your money for Eric Metaxas's book on Bonhoeffer. It's lauded in certain religious circles, but it is used and abused to support a kind of right-wing agenda. I do not like it. And there's a great quote in there that I think that he basically just makes up. Some of the stuff is just false in it. And you should not use that as any primary text. If you want to do some comparing of text and your own research, good, go to it. But you'll see there's a great quote in there that if you're on the wrong train, it won't help if you're running in the other direction to try to change the course of the train's trajectory. something a little bit more quippy than that. But there's no place that I found, and I searched and searched and searched, where Bonhoeffer really ever said that. And Metaxas would tell you that, and he doesn't go into this because he doesn't have the intellectual chops to do it, but he doesn't go into how come Bonhoeffer is so revered and we admire him so. He went to Union Seminary, which these days would be a bastion of liberalism, and even back then was on the cutting edge of biblical interpretation. And Eric Metaxas is not in that kind of camp at all. But do not give much credence to Eric Metaxas's book on Bonhoeffer. I didn't even want to have you see the cover. Go find it for yourself, but I don't want to promote that at all. There are a lot of resources that are free on the internet, the most recent of which is Martin Doblmeier's book, video, and you can watch it online or you can purchase it. And Brent and I have thought about doing a little film festival of all the books, of all the videos that Mr. Doblmeier has put out under Journey Films. He's done a thing on Dorothy Day, Howard Thurman, there's a couple more, Bonhoeffer and Heschel. And they're very good videos. But the Memories and Perspectives, also that came out in 2003, is a black and white kind of remembrance. It's kind of a crude thing, but it's an hour and a half that would bless you if you chose to spend your time doing it. And it's really, really good. In 2020, TGA Productions put out a pretty interesting documentary, about an hour and 26 minutes long. And it's not for free, but you can rent it for $3.99 or you can buy it at $8.99. And by the way, that Charles Marsh book, you can see him talk about it on PBS, and that was from 2015 and the year after it came out. There's also another book about Bonhoeffer called Bonhoeffer, Agent of Grace. A professor at the University of Oregon had a passion for Bonhoeffer, and he rallied the troops and got sources of funding from the Lutheran Church and from entity in Canada and Oregon and Wisconsin Public Television, and finally put this together. And this movie video is about Bonhoeffer's last 10 years of life, from basically 1930-31 until he was the last 15 years. And it shows him in Harlem. It depicts him being in the United States. And by the way, the people at Union, they were one after another besought him to stay in the United States so that he could resist the Nazis from afar. And he said, no, I've got to go back. I've got to be with my people. I've got to be in the midst of life in Germany, and I will not stay, be a bystander. I will be in the midst of it. Next slide. There's also these other resources. In the Christian Century in 2015, you see the claims on Bonhoeffer, the misuse of a theologian. The Bonhoeffer Center was created as the website for the International Bonhoeffer Society, and they're pretty much on the same kind of link, but you can get that on Facebook. And then there's a really curious thing called the Bonhoeffer Project, which asked for and has received people who volunteered to be part of cohorts that will study and commit to a lifestyle of living after the example of Bonhoeffer. Some of it's based on Life Together, the seminary book, or what I call the seminary book about community. Some of it's definitely based on the Cost of Discipleship and ethics and Letters and Papers from Prison. But it's very interesting that it has garnered and attracted so many devotees of Bonhoeffer that they could even create a project about this. The picture that I've included here is from Westminster Abbey, and there is a kind of a hall of martyrs or 20th century martyrs that was not finished at Westminster Abbey until 1998. And that is the one that they have for Bonhoeffer. It doesn't look anything like him, except they've got his fleeting little tuft of hair there on his increasingly bald head. But I like this picture and another that is at the very end of our time together when we'll have Q&A, of him holding a book, because he is a person of words. He's a great intellectual force, and he wrote exceedingly powerfully. And I like that they have him holding a book. That's probably the Bible, by the way. We're going to view a video clip, and this is from Religion and Ethics Weekly. God bless Bob Abernathy. What a great, great leader in public television, but also what a great leader in the world of religion, because we have many wonderful interviews with him of great souls.
Give me a second.
No problem.
I travel around to so many places.
Go through an ad here.
The answer to climate change is communities everywhere creating more resilience in the natural world to rebalance the planet. That must be the key that can save us all.
Changing Planet, now streaming.
This weekend will be the 100th anniversary of the birth of Dietrich Bonhoeffer, the German theologian put to death by the Nazis, whose writings and life made him a modern martyr. In the U.S. and Europe, there will be observances in his honor, among them a documentary on Bonhoeffer to run on most PBS stations February 6th. We have images from that program. Bonhoeffer was raised in a distinguished but not particularly religious family, said to have been surprised by his decision to study theology. He was brilliant, getting his doctorate at age 21. Then he spent a year at Union Theological Seminary in New York. He studied ethics under Reinhold Niebuhr and also discovered the fervor and social consciousness of Harlem's Abyssinian Baptist Church, where he taught Sunday school. I know the Lord's laid his hands on me. Christianity, Bonhoeffer came to believe, meant not just professing faith, but really putting into practice Jesus' teachings in the Sermon on the Mount. When he returned to Germany in the early 1930s, his convictions were tested dramatically. Adolf Hitler and the Nazis were just coming to power. What should Bonhoeffer do about them? He spoke out, urging his fellow Lutherans to reject as idolatry the Nazi claim that the Fuhrer and the state deserved allegiance above that owed to God. Bonhoeffer also condemned Nazi persecution of the Jews, urging the Christian church to stand with the Jews and all victims. He also helped some Jews escape. By the late 1930s, Bonhoeffer realized that for him, even though he respected pacifism and nonviolence in principle, Hitler's war-making and injustice required resistance. A Christian must act, he insisted, so he joined a conspiracy to oppose Hitler. It seemed a lesser evil than doing nothing. Bonhoeffer became part of a resistance cell inside German military intelligence. On trips abroad, he tried to get Allied support for the German resistance, but he was not successful. In 1943, Bonhoeffer's fellow resistors tried to kill Hitler, but failed. The Gestapo identified Bonhoeffer as part of the plot, arrested him, and sent him to prison. Earlier, in a widely influential book, The Cost of Discipleship, Bonhoeffer had condemned what he called cheap grace, accepting God's love without cost. At the same time, he extolled costly grace, grace that requires radical obedience, even the willingness to die for one's beliefs, which Bonhoeffer did. Less than a month before the war in Europe ended, the Nazis moved him from prison to a concentration camp and hanged him on April 9th, 1945. He was 39 years old. Some Christian pacifists say Bonhoeffer was wrong to resist evil with violence, but for millions of other Christians, Bonhoeffer became an inspiring symbol of what it can mean in times of crisis and every day to practice what you preach. Again, the PBS documentary on Bonhoeffer is scheduled for Monday night.
Unfortunately, to my knowledge, there are no films of Bonhoeffer talking, either in English, I didn't think there would be, and nor in German, or at least I've never seen them, nor witnessed them. It would be interesting to see what his mannerisms were like, to see how he was in a room, especially in front of students. He was always a teacher, and he continues to even teach now. If we could go to the next slide, Brent. There are some catchphrases that he left to the world that he bequeathed for our consideration. He said the phrase, "a world come of age," and this was his description of the world's complexities, including radical evil. He did not get to see the explosion of the atomic bomb, but I wonder what he would have said about it as well. He says this extraordinary, heroic line, when Christ calls a man, he bids him to come and die. This is how he described the call of faith and the risk of conversion. And this is a death to the old ways of living, which would be ignoring the needs of neighbors, and also Jesus's example as the premier guidance for action. You've heard probably something called cheap grace, and this was Bonhoeffer, and he was the one who coined that term in contradistinction with costly discipleship. I'll talk a little bit about that later on in the next couple of slides, about how witnessing to our faith can cost us something. It can cost us even friendships. And one must weigh whether that cost is worth the action. He viewed Jesus's prayer book as the Psalms as Jesus's prayer book, and this is something he taught the seminary students in the underground seminary at Finkenwald, but also that he has taught subsequently to untold numbers of his devotees. Why the Psalms? Well, they reflect life in all of life's fullness and complexities, all of its exhilarating joys and disappointing defeats. You can go from, for example, Psalm 22, my God, why hast thou forsaken me? And many of us heard that phrase uttered on Good Friday at a service that we attended or in Bible study readings that we were doing. But then you can have the reassurance of Psalm 23, the Lord is my shepherd, I shall not want. He viewed the Psalms as important because Jesus prayed the Psalms, and Jesus utters or quotes from them on the cross, for example. He viewed the Psalms as important because as you begin to pray them, you begin to understand how to pray in the name of Jesus Christ, which is a lot more complicated to go in than we have time for here, much more mystical, but he believed in that as well. On prayer, he had exceedingly important things to say. It's ultimately personal, but it's also eventually communal. You know, in other words, it's always tinged with intimate connections, the way a child's life is bound to a parent, but it also connects, makes us creates community. For Christians, prayer is made possible by Jesus Christ. Remember that Romans 8:26 has this great line, "For we do not know how to pray, but the Holy Spirit intercedes for us with sighs too deep for words." In other words, we're instructed how to pray. We're guided in the action of our prayers. We're inspired, literally, by the Spirit. We're enthused. We have God into us from the Holy Spirit, and that's what affords us the capacity even to pray. Jesus' instruction and exemplary prayer, which we call the Lord's Prayer, shows subsequent followers like us how to pray. Prayer is a primary source for our enduring. One can only imagine what it was like for him to go from April of 1943 until April of 1945, imprisoned, and knowing that he might be and then eventually was killed. And then one can more fully become a bearer of God's word by steeping oneself in prayer and meditation. Now we're going to get to some kind of meaty stuff and some questions. He was a poet, by the way. His challenging example puts forth the necessity of an interior struggle to ask, like he did, who am I? Who am I? This or the other? Am I one person today or tomorrow another? Am I both at once? Am I a hypocrite? Am I a weakling? Who am I? They mock me, he says, these lonely questions of mine. Whoever I am, thou knowest, O God, I am thine. He ends up with a prayer of surrender. But he also engages in challenging us to pay attention to good and evil. In one place, in this book called After 10 Years, he talks about good and evil. I just got this yesterday, and it is exceedingly stimulating, not very long. I mean, I think it's a total of 31 pages, barely. There's an essay that he wrote called After 10 Years, that he wrote in 1943, and then some commentary by Miss Barnett. So he says good and evil, neither protest nor force can touch this thing called folly. That good and evil are not the primary enemies of living responsibly and wisely. They're not set at odds with each other per se. The primary enemy is folly. And protest and force cannot touch it. Reasoning is no use. Facts that contradict personal prejudices can simply be disbelieved. Indeed, the fool can counter by criticizing them, and if they are undeniable, they can just be pushed aside as trivial exceptions. So the fool, as distinct from the scoundrel, is completely self-satisfied. One feels when talking to him that one is dealing not with the man himself, but with slogans, catchwords, and the like, which have taken hold of him. He is under a spell. Does that sound familiar? In any way, does that sound familiar to our times? Remember that he is writing this 10 years after Hitler's rise to power. And Bonhoeffer has seen this National Socialism, the Nazi Party, begin to ascend in the late 20s, then become real powerful when Hitler becomes Chancellor in 1933. And then 10 years later in 43, he's writing this. In this book, folly is not the word. And I don't know what the word is in German, but what he calls folly in one translation, this person calls it's stupidity. And instead of saying, so the fool, he says, so the stupid person, as distinct from the scoundrel, is completely self-satisfied. Now, I like and prefer the word folly, but I wonder if that was a kind of nicer way of dealing with this, and that Bonhoeffer really did want to put a barb on his charge about how a whole society can relate to, can succumb to folly, or in the newer translation, stupidity. I don't think calling other people stupid helps a dialogue at all. And folly, because it's such a rare word in our common vocabulary, might be a more interesting and engaging way to talk about our differences. But the dynamics and the kind of non-reasonableness of it all may be very, very similar. Next slide. So here are some kind of summary statements about Bonhoeffer's challenging example. His resistance to Hitler and the Nazis was theological, it was ecclesial, it was absolutely about the churches succumbing to the Reich of Hitler. It was political, he was involved in political resistance, and it was existential. He personally had a stake in this. Bonhoeffer has been misused and abused. Pat Robertson invoked Bonhoeffer when he said that Hugo Chavez should be assassinated, because after all, Bonhoeffer participated in the assassination plot for Hitler. Paul Hill would bomb an abortion clinic and claim as his exemplar Dietrich Bonhoeffer. That's a horrible misuse of who Bonhoeffer was. We have the challenge too of Bonhoeffer's big, and by that I mean heroic, his big life compared to ours. But I would caution you to not shrink in the face of Bonhoeffer. And I would ask you, do we really have to do something big to engage in righteous morality? The what ifs abound, and here I'll make it personal again. People ask, what if he hadn't been murdered and martyred? What if he had lived and shown the world a new way? What if the Flossenburg prison had been liberated? All the books that he would have written, the new way he would have taught us to think about faith and engaging in the realities of the 20th century. But I want to suggest that the only real question we actually can answer is this one. What if we lived differently because of what we have learned from his example? That's a question that has an answer and that we can answer. Here again, spanning over his life with his twin sister Sabine, when he's leading, you can only imagine him leading a youth group with a guitar, and then playing the piano with his family in their living room, at a camp with students. And then this picture that I like a lot of Bonhoeffer holding a book. It may be a Bible, it may be one of his own books. There we have Dietrich Bonhoeffer. I'm sorry, I've gone on a little bit too long, I think, but there's a lot here. And he is one of the great, great souls of the 20th century, for sure. I hope that wasn't boring, and I hope it's not too theological for you.
No.
But I will tell you the parallels. I've tried to study Weimar, Germany, the Weimar Republic that led up to Hitler, to ask, what were they doing then that we might take a lesson from now? I asked a friend of mine in 2016, should we write a new Barmen Declaration to fascism and to what I saw as being promoted in the American political arena? Should we have because the Barmen Declaration, when it finally came out, it was too late. The culture had been captured. So it's a great declaration, and Karl Barth is a great theologian, and it's always pointed to the Barmen Declaration. It's so cool. Well, was it cool in saving 6 million Jews? No, it didn't work. It was too late. It was too little, too late. My friend Stephen Shoemaker, we've become friends. You know, he's more than just a person I've friended on Facebook. We've communicated, and he's a wonderful human being. He's a Baptist minister, and he wrote a piece recently called "Is It Time Now for a New Barmen Declaration?" And he wrote this last May in 2021. I believe it's May or July. And I was asking that in 2016. I don't think it's too late for us. But I do think that we need that people of faith, and this time it could be interfaith. It could be with Muslims. It could be with Jews. It could be with the Sikhs, with Baha'is, with Buddhists. We could make a declaration in the United States against fascism. I'm sorry we lost Susan. Oh, there she is again. She's come back. So questions?
Bob, this is Pete.
Yeah,
Can you hear
Pete.
me? Yeah. When we met you in Kansas City, Kay and I had just been to the Auschwitz exhibit, which is haunting to say the least, you know, horrifying to see the artifacts, the parcels of the train, the fence, the piles of shoes. I can remember them all, but the photographs that haunt me the most are those of the happy German families going to work. And I wonder, how can you go to the camps? How can they do that?
Mm-hmm.
You know, and there was these pictures of these happy looking people going to work at the concentration camps, you know, murdering people every day. And that's the pictures that haunt me the most. That's the picture. I'm looking at that and I'm going, how did you get there? How do you how do you ever think that's okay? You know, and so you're
Great question.
You know, and that's the picture that just sticks in my mind. I mean,
I think I want to invoke the TSA here. Do you know their motto? If you see something, say something.
say something.
If you
Yeah.
see some evil, you say something. I did this during the football season, during one of the playoff games, where this cadre of folks in my bubble at that time, we always watched the Chiefs game, and they were criticizing the coach and said, "Oh, I don't like that coach." And I said, "You don't like his philosophy, or you don't like, is he a bad person?" "Oh, I just don't like the way he looks." And I said, "That's kind of shallow." I said, "You know, why would you say that? He's a fine human being. Do you know what he does?" And I've cited some kind of philanthropic work that he was involved in the nonprofit world to help people in the community. I can't remember what coach it was now, but I took umbrage. I took offense, and I said something. I mean, and I'm not lifting myself up as the example. There's been many times when I've shirked that responsibility, but we all need to count the cost and say, if I hear an anti-Semitic joke, or somebody criticizing somebody for being a turban wearer, all those turban wearers are the same. Which ones do you mean? Do you know any personally? What religion are they? Do you know why they wear a turban? Why are you categorizing that as a bad thing? I kind of wish I had a turban, then I wouldn't risk sunstroke on my bald scalp. Why do you want to put them down? Stop it. Stop that. We're better than that. All human beings are better than the prejudices that they spew from time to time, but they don't get better unless we catch ourselves and understand the discomfort we have in the presence of such bigotry and stupidity, or to use Bonhoeffer's other word, folly, and say, that's folly. You're better than that. You don't have to succumb to that. You may have friends that think it's funny. You may have friends that think that you're really clever because you manipulated something into a humus frame of mind. Stop that. You're better than that. We're all better than that. We need to call each other, to use Lincoln's phrase, to the better angels of our nature. This is sounding way too sanctimonious. Let me just back off just a little bit, okay? I don't mean to sound so earnest. I'm reminded that Bonhoeffer loved a good brandy snifter and a good cigar. And he would enjoy one of those or several of those in his bourgeois living room with his family. He loved that. And he loved the academic life. But he wasn't satisfied with it. And he put himself into the breach. He threw himself into the breach. He didn't stay satisfied with his life in Harlem, in New York. No, he had to go back to Germany, and at a young age. And by the way, I think his engagement in 1943 is one of his greatest acts of hope. He becomes engaged. I will get out. We will have a life together. We'll have a family. They become engaged. And then less than 3 months later, he's imprisoned. But he acted with hope, I think.
Bob, a small thing. Do you happen to know what happened to the fiance?
I do not. I do think that she eventually married somebody else, but I think you can find that out.
Okay.
She did not become part of the Bonhoeffer entourage, meaning the kind of industry. To my knowledge, by the way, his love letters or his letters to and fro, they were published eventually, but she did not try to capitalize, monetize their relationship, nor become a celebrity because of it.
Okay.
So
I do know that.
Wikipedia says she was kind of instrumental because they were engaged. She could visit him in prison, and she did do some message taking.
She was a courier in some ways, yes.
Is it? Oh, go ahead.
Go ahead, Kay.
Is it kind of surprising he was able to evade arrest as long as he did?
Yeah, because I think it was because of his status and his father's status. I think, he was kind of upper crust of German society. He was a Lutheran and by God, look at him. I mean, he's the Nazi ideal of the Aryan perfect manhood, isn't he? Except he loses his hair, but it's blonde. He's toe-headed. He would go on the poster for Hitler Youth.
Yeah.
I mean, he didn't, by the way. I'm not saying that he did,
right.
But he would have been a perfect candidate for that. The idiocy, stupidity, or folly that Hitler pervaded throughout German culture, it consumed German culture. These rallies were real. There were tens of thousands of soldiers. They had these big rallies at night. What's her name? Rosenthal, the filmmaker, captured it. I mean, she was part of the propaganda machine. And Goebbels perfected in the 20th century something that even political candidates use now. Tell a lie long enough, and then eventually people will begin to believe it. And that was Goebbels that did that. And they did it to Germany, and they are doing it, I would say, in Russia right now. Putin is doing it. And there's, we have lots of challenges in front of us where misinformation and lies are being told.
This is Liz. I just finished reading a book that was recommended to me by Joe, who's not here today, called Caste, C-A-S-T-E. And one of the things that blew me away that I had not known previously was how much evidence there is. They talk about 3 different caste systems in the world. India, which people are very familiar with, Hitler's caste, which obviously was ended, and the United States. And her argument is that the United States is the greatest of the caste systems, and she presents all sorts of evidence that Adolf Hitler used our caste system to build his, actually took our laws, actually took our procedures, actually took quotes and words and documents from the United States to build his caste system. That broke my heart.
That makes me cry.
Yeah.
Yep.
And so I appreciate your comment about we need a Barman declaration, because we hope it's not too late. I mean, obviously lots of things have been going on. The misinformation is just becoming very frustrating. And it is hard to know as an individual person what one is capable of doing. But you're right, we do need to speak up, and we do need to have our eyes open and see what is actually happening.
If you see something, say something.
Yep.
Right.
And also
Otherwise,
prepare.
no one will speak for you.
Prepare to lose. And this is not very good for Americans. And I hate losing, if I had my way, the Chiefs would go 17-0 every season.
Amen.
I would love that. I just would love it. I mean, I was thinking the other day, the home run pace right now in the American League is so ferocious. I think Judge has 9 home runs for the Yankees. He's on a pace for like 85 home runs. I'd love that. I'd love somebody to be the first player to ever hit 100 home runs. I like offense, right? But you need to be prepared to lose. In some of these ethical dilemmas, if you really stand up for what you truly believe in your faith, in your own personal morality, you're going to lose some friends. Just kind of anticipate it, get used to it, be ready for it. It'll happen.
Yeah.
And but if you do so, I don't think I've ever used this quote in our time together. This is another great soul. I don't have enough material to do a thing on prayer, and he's not terribly religious, except he was an incredible artist. George Nakashima. He was a furniture maker. And he made these peace tables. There's 2 in the United Nations, I think. He had a studio in upstate New York. He said, you want to do your work in such a way that you can go to sleep at night with an honest face. So you want to count the cost and the losses you may have, but you want to act in such a way that you can go to sleep tonight and every night with an honest face.
Yeah.
It's a great quote. I discovered him in some museum in New York. What's the museum right near Central Park on the Upper West Side?
Guggenheim?
It's the Whitney.
No, not the Whitney. That's not it.
Guggenheim?
No, not the Guggenheim. That's too far north. It's just a regular. You'll say it. I mean, I can't remember, but at that museum, there's an example of his artistry and a piece of furniture in the architecture portion of the museum. And
Well,
anyway,
and your comment, Bob, brings one more thing to mind that, we hear a lot. This is not who we are when people are talking about something bad that has happened or something they don't agree with. And I have decided I cannot accept that statement any longer, because the things that we do, the things that happen here are who we are. We've just buried them. We've tried to ignore them. We've tried to pretend they don't happen. We've tried to pretend that we are the preamble to the Constitution, and we're not. And so
I'm saying something. If I said that phrase, I don't recall, but what I did say is we're better than our stupidity.
You did not say that.
We're better. We're better than that, at least. And now I haven't given up. There's some people who've given up and don't believe that anybody is better. That they believe in Hobbes's that the world is red in tooth and claw, and that life is short, nasty, and brutish. I don't believe that that's the way life was supposed to be, and I don't believe that the life that is a unavoidable fate. I think it's a choice.
Is it the Metropolitan Museum?
That's it. That's it. Yeah. Thank you.
Thanks,
The
Kay.
Metropolitan Museum. It's in there, and you can go see his handiwork. I don't think the quote is there. I discovered the quote elsewhere.
I want to thank Kay for being a reference librarian today.
We appreciate it.
I want to share. It's pretty short. These Journey films that has some of the great souls. Bob has talked about some of them just as a way to reminder of some of the other people that we have met with Bob along the way. And then I think Bob and I are maybe contemplating a little crazy idea that maybe this
Film
might be
festival.
fun. Yeah.
Oh, wow.
So hang on, folks.
At which we will have brandy and cigars.
Against the most dramatic events of the 20th century, these 5 remarkable figures offered a prophetic voice of faith, hope, and courage.
He could have such a very deep faith in God, even in the midst of incredible darkness.
Dietrich Bonhoeffer, the young German theologian who joined the plots to kill Adolf Hitler.
You can almost sense that eventually he is going to somehow do something to put a spoke in the wheel of the Third Reich.
So Niebuhr was always present in my mind in a very practical way, particularly when I became president and was facing the constant threat of a nuclear war which would have destroyed the world.
America's great public theologian, Reinhold Niebuhr.
God give us grace to accept with serenity the things that cannot be changed.
Writer, preacher, and mentor to the civil rights movement, Howard Thurman.
I would have to find out what was the word that the religion of Jesus had to say to the man with his back against the wall.
He provided a spiritual perspective that was empowering.
Dorothy Day, the journalist and activist who started the Catholic Worker newspaper and Homes for the Destitute.
Well, I think if you take the Lord's words, you'll find they're pretty rigorous. The Sermon on the Mount may be read with great enjoyment, but when it comes to practicing it, it really is an examination of conscience to see how far we go.
She didn't want people serving the poor as if they're doing them a favor. On the contrary, everybody was treated with the utmost respect.
She would say, "Don't call me a saint. I don't want to be written off that easily."
And a rabbi who barely escaped the Holocaust and captured the imagination of America, Abraham Joshua Heschel.
I am an optimist against my better judgment. Somehow I believe in God, and somehow I believe and am convinced that He will have mercy and pity, more than we deserve.
He's part of a dynastic royalty.
I think they became friends, but more than friends, they became brothers.
In this day and age, I think that if you ask young, committed Jews who the most important Jew of the 20th century was for them, it would undoubtedly be Abraham Joshua Heschel.
What does it mean to be a prophetic voice?
Coming to a community and telling the community things it doesn't always want to hear. Prophets are not popular.
Well, I think a prophet in politics is someone who sees what others are blind to.
Niebuhr kept us from being naive about the evil structures of society.
Each of us has a choice to make. What side of history do we ultimately want to land on?
Each was widely celebrated, yet each had their critics.
I not only admire Niebuhr, I love him. I disagree with almost everything that he said.
My father was attacked for so many of the public positions that he took. My father wouldn't be quiet. No one could silence him.
5 award-winning documentaries from filmmaker Martin Dobelmeyer. Prophetic Voices, a special collection of compelling stories of faith, hope, and courage.
So actually, Bob has covered 3 out of the 5, with us. And so I think the idea, just to flesh this out, Bob and I are thinking about buying the licensing rights for a showing of this, and then maybe trying to organize a film festival that would be accompanied by the film and then maybe some other attended activities. So stay tuned. It could be just a wild hair idea that, time and coffee will always engender in my crazy mind, but there you have it.
That sounds great.
Brent, I'm trying to think, who do we have next?
Well, Buck O'Neill is one. I think you're still working on him.
Yeah, well, we'll have Buck O'Neill, but that's July, or is that June?
Right. Well, that's July. Then the other one is the Japanese.
Oh, Toyohiko Kagawa. Yes. Toyohiko Kagawa, you will love. And I think he's the next one.
Yes.
And then we'll that'll be June someday.
5th. June 5 is a Sunday.
June the 5th.
We're down
June the 5th, we'll do Toyohiko Kagawa.
We might be able to.
The only person who's been nominated for the Nobel Peace Prize, as well as the Nobel Prize of Literature.
And in Bob's full set, Great Souls, the manuscript version, he has Dorothy Day and he has Reinhold.
And we can do Dorothy Day, and we could do Dorothy Day and Reinhold Niebuhr.
So
the treatment of Niebuhr that we could do is he's the person who created the Serenity Prayer that 12 steppers use around the world. God grant me the serenity to accept the things I cannot change. And the original prayer is much longer and different, but it's the basis of it. Any rate, yeah, we could do that. We ought to do that finally.
So I'm always appreciative for Bob to enthusiastically offer up to do more, because I've not given him any bourbon or cigars.
Well, the more bourbon that comes, the more likely I'm able to do this.
All right. Well, I think
you give me a bottle of Pappy Van Winkle, and I think you got me for 5 years.
Well, all right. So noted. That won't be in the edited version.
I was going to say, so recorded.
So anyway, any comments, any questions, thoughts? What did people learn today that they did not know?
Thank you.
My pleasure.
Yes, thank you.
Some people don't know about Susan, were you going to say something?
No, I don't have anything really exciting to say. Just thank you, and just giving us background about him and his life and what he went through. Scratches the surface. I know you've got to get in these books, but it gives you some really good backstory about where he came from.
And these resources on the internet, on YouTube, are pretty amazing. They're free. I mean, there's 2 good, one very, they're kind of not entertaining, but inspiring. All of them will be inspiring, the free offerings on the internet.
Bob, one thing I should do, I should take all the free internet resources from the different sessions and just put them on a single page.
That'd
online,
be cool.
So
Yeah.
that somebody could, go back.
Just go in there and click on them.
Yeah. I'll take a look at them all. So somebody in the church want to close us with a prayer?
Everyone's looking at me. Okay. Lord, we thank you, as always, for this precious time spent together and for our ability to be able to learn from those who have gone before us. We thank you that we have all of these forms of communication and ways of archiving information. Please help us to continue to open our minds and our hearts so that we can take them to heart so that we can truly take on the mantle of discipleship, and do the things that we are called to do, and not just simply look to the others around us as either examples or hoping that they will continue to carry the yoke in our place. We ask this in the name of your Son, Jesus Christ. Amen.